Jitendra Bhargava, who's a former ED at Air India, and he's, of course, very recently also authored a book on the national carrier. He joins in live here to really weigh in on how we should be viewing the terms and conditions of what's possibly the most high-profile asset sale by the government. Mr. Bhargava, good evening to you, and thank you so much for taking time out for us. This has been a long-awaited demand, I know, by you. What did you make of, what the terms and conditions are? The government will sell 76% stake in Air India. Also, what's going to be clubbed with that is 100% in Air India Express and 50% in the ground handling unit. Do you think this is all an effort to make things more lucrative for, potential buyers?
You see, I see today's decision as a reaffirmation of government's resolve to disinvest in Air India, which is a very welcome move, because without disinvestment and under the current avatar, Air India has no future. So it's a very welcome step from that perspective. It comes on question is of how much equity to divest is where the question is. I have been a strong advocate of government divesting 100% of the equity and letting a new airline, the acquirer, operate the airline the way they want it, because Air India needs drastic measures for revival. Now, government has naturally retained 24% in the hope that once the airline does well in the next 3 years under new management, they will be able to monetize the 24% asset. Now, my plea to the potential bidders for Air India would be that seek from government a legally bound written guarantees of no meddling in Air India affairs. The government's past track record has been of meddling in Air India affairs, interfering with the kind of equity stake that they had. Because had they allowed Air India to be run commercially, as it was being run during JRD Tata's time, we wouldn't have found Air India in the state it is in. So it is for the in government's own interest also to ensure that they have a hands-off policy. Let the professional company which acquires Air India run it as a commercial entity. And if it can, you will find Air India regaining the glorious height that we have often spoken about, that Air India once commanded during JRD Tata's stewardship. So it's a very welcome move, and I only hope the government now fast tracks the whole thing, because it's been almost 10 months since the cabinet gave its in principle approval. Now it's been taking time. And what is unfortunately happening during this period is that there has been a lot of discontent building within the airline as well. Not that it's going to matter, because most employees are convinced that unless there is a change in management structure, Air India has no future. So having established this, and Air India being seeing increasing marginalization over a period of time, market share going down, both on the international sector and in the domestic sector. Now this decision will help Air India's future.
Mr. Bhargava, it also seems that the government's very keen to give Indian carriers a chance, and that's why, the document that's been uploaded today on the website by the government says that all carriers with zero or negative net worth are allowed to participate, provided they form a consortium with other partners. The minimum net worth, of course, has to be 5,000 crores. So basically, this means that, whether it's Jet, Indigo, Vistara, they're all going to bid. But the fact is, they're all going to bid with partners. What's your assessment? What's the kind of interest out there for, Air India's assets?
You see, people have been more concerned about Air India's huge debt and mounting losses. Unfortunate part is this, that focus has been on these factors, but not on the tangible assets that Air India puts on the table for a potential acquirer. Now look at, for example, Indigo. Indigo is India's largest domestic player, but is it counted amongst the top league airlines of the world like Air France, British Airways, Singapore Airlines, Japan Airlines, Qantas, etc.? The answer is no. Now imagine if they were to acquire Air India, it catapults itself into the mega league of airlines, global airlines, because you get on a platter 17% international market share that Air India currently holds. And if only Air India is managed professionally under private ownership, you will reap rich dividends. Now that is where the thing, and besides the fact is, the tangible assets, slots, parking spaces, aircraft, trained pilots, engineers, they're all available on a platter for an airline. All that Air India requires is professional leadership, which has been lacking for the last few years in Air India, as a consequence of which Air India has suffered enormously. Now, when we look at from the government's perspective, it's a good decision they're going to take, because they finally realized that Air India needs a different kind of management. The question to be asked of government is, if you have this realization, why in the last 4 years, at least of the NDA Raj, have you not allowed a hands-off policy on Air India? Now, if only this was done, the marginalization that has taken place in a market share, only 12.7 in domestic market, 16.9% on the international market, perhaps would have been much higher.
You know, Mr. Bhargava, Air India has a total debt of 52,000 crore, of which about 33,000 crore is on account of working capital loans, which will be transferred to an SPV. Now, many would argue that perhaps it would have been better if the government had assumed the entire debt.
You know, the fact is, one can always say that government could have taken over the entire debt, but wouldn't have been there a public outcry on why is government, on the taxpayers' money, people are being taxed? That would have been a question. So it's a good balance that government has drawn, that part of the loan, let's put it this way, the aircraft still have life that Air India has in its fleet. There are a significant part of the loan are on that account. So naturally, when you take the aircraft, you also take the balance loan that you need to repay. As far as the working capital is concerned, I would quite agree with you that yes, government needs to take over that function, because you cannot saddle the new airline, the acquiring airline, to be burdened with it. So it's a very balanced decision that government has taken, and I'd say if you look at from the government perspective, they've done an exceedingly good job, barring the fact of that 76% and not 100% divestment. I can't fault the air government on any plane, on any facet of it, because it's a good decision, well thought out thing. So you must credit the government that they've done a good job with it.
Okay, so you're saying that one has to credit the government, but of course, Mr. Bhargava, is also a very bold decision, not just politically, because you've already got Mamata Banerjee sort of, putting her thoughts out on Twitter, and she's clearly up in arms. But on the other hand, there's also a large employee base. Do you expect turbulence ahead, as far as that is concerned? Because how do you suppose the government will go about protecting Air India's employees from job losses?
You see, Air India has an emotional connect. Nobody doubts that. So it's a good decision on the part of the government to ensure that the Air India name is retained. As far as the employees are concerned, they also have this realization they've lost the kind of strength that they once commanded of paralyzing Air India, because the market will not suffer with only 1 in 7 passengers flying, patronizing Air India. So they will have their realization. I don't think they will take an extreme set. But the onus is on the government to ensure that the employees get a fair deal. It's not just a question of their being retained for 1 year by the acquiring airline, but to ensure that they are put through a training program to re-engineer work practices, because not all employees, I would say, are inefficient, unproductive. There are a whole lot of people who can be retrained to move from a government environment which is of low productivity, etc., to a private sector working environment. So 1 year time should be enough. And let's not also forget that of the 11,900 odd employees, permanent employees that Air India has on its roll, 37% are due to retire in the next 5 years. Of this 11,900 people, you have almost 2,000 pilots, which are a scarce commodity. You have 4,000 cabin crew, which an airline will need, because otherwise you'll have to spend money on training people. But yes, there are a large chunk of people who will have to be given the golden handshake, because that will be in the best interest of the employees as well as the acquiring airline, because nobody would like them to be saddled with such costs that it itself get paralyzed in trying to run or operate Air India. So besides this fact, you have a large chunk of retired employees of Air India, which also need to be taken care of. The fact is, it is not the government of India that has built Air India's assets. It is the employees of Air India who have built the assets, so they need to be accorded top priority. Their welfare should be the main concern of the government, while divesting or washing their hands of Air India through disinvestment.
And Mr. Bhargava, we'll leave it at that. Always a pleasure to have you chat with us here on ET Now. We really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, sir.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.